Tak a my už posúvame sa ďalej medzi nášho ďalšieho, alebo vítam u nás medzi nami nášho ďalšieho veľmi, veľmi vzácneho hostia. Je to Mr. Andreas Schleicher, Director of Education and Competencies, let's say, Department from OECD. Mr. Schleicher, hello, welcome.
Hello, can you see me?
Yes, we can. Turn is yours.
And you have my presentation?
It's loading. Yes, now we can see. Thank you.
Very good. Yes, it's a pleasure to share this time with you. Of course, these are very difficult times for education, but over the last months, we have also seen remarkable commitment and also energy and ideas to change education. And often, real change happens in a moment of deep crisis. But if you look at this, we have 1.5 billion students who are being locked out of their schools. And one of the things they all figured out is that in the future, technology and education simply must work. Remote learning has become the lifeline for education, but it hasn't been doing well in addressing the social function of schools. I think that's something we need to recognize. And we also see that currently access, use, and quality of online resources tend to exacerbate inequality in education. But let's have a look at some of the data. The first thing is how this crisis has brought people together, to work together. When we surveyed 36 countries, you can see that governments and school typically work together to find alternative arrangements for schooling, teachers a little bit less so, but still, you have about 9% of the cases where parents took the things into their own hands, and then actually 6% of schools who made their own arrangements. But generally, you can see actually it's been a collaborative effort to deal with this pandemic. What encouraged me most is that government officials and teachers typically agree that everybody did everything they could do to help. Again, it shows the willingness of people in this crisis to work together. Close to 80% say that the confinement strategy was designed in collaboration with teachers. 44% said there was good collaboration between public and private stakeholders. Very few people thought it was, all top-down, very little insights, and so on. And I think that's very, very important. But it's also clear that the alternative arrangements to schools have not worked for everyone. If you look at some of the data, Italy will see 76 school days lost. On average, across countries, it's still 46 days. And that's all going to take a deep toll on learners and societies. If you think about it, one lost school year is equivalent to roughly 7 to 10% of lifetime earnings. So actually, this kind of crisis is going to leave a deep impact on the chances of people. According to government officials, just about 40% of students were able to access most of the curriculum. Also, teachers are a little bit more optimistic here, but you can really see that despite all the technology, all the additional means, we did not reach many students on this. And of course, when curriculum time is more limited, countries have to make tough choices on where you want to set priorities. And that is never easy. Now, you can see virtually all countries put academic learning first. But you can also see the bar is very long for professional support for teachers, the social development of students, and also support for parents. And then, you can see over 2/3 of the respondents prioritizing the well-being of students and teachers. Probably you'd like to see this to be 100%, but still, I think you can see the social and emotional support for learners, for teachers, for parents really has been a very, very important response to the crisis. And we need to keep in mind that education is never a transactional phenomenon. It's always a relational phenomenon, a social phenomenon. When you look at academic learning, roughly 40% of the respondents said that they narrowed down the subjects. There was less time available, less opportunities, so there was greater priority on the core subjects. That was essential for student progression, for examinations. But you can also see other countries highlight the need to foster a wider range of cognitive, social, and emotional learning. This crisis has taught us that what matters most is the individual resilience of people, the growth mindset of young people, the capacity of young people to solve complex problems, to deal and navigate ambiguities. Those kinds of skills have become very, very important. And 12% of the people said all this was about keeping young people engaged, keeping them connected with some form of learning, even there wasn't much academic content. But let's move from the what to the how. And obviously, this was the time for technology to make a difference. You can see that over 90% of the respondents said that existing online instructional resources were being used. You can really see this has been a global phenomenon, at least in the more advanced nations, the 36 countries that we surveyed. But look at the second part. Most of that online instruction was delivered by the students' teachers. So this is not about some magic platforms providing educational content and students logging in. No, actually, most of the online learning that we've seen were individual teachers linking up with their students through technology. Now, that's been the dominant form of learning in the COVID crisis. And I think that's important, again, to keep in mind the pivotal role of people in the system. Technology can amplify good teaching, but it doesn't replace poor teaching. And then, of course, you have instructional practices, educational television, also that played an important role, and so on. And this hasn't come out of the blue. Our Thales survey in 2018 showed how the share of teachers who use technology for projects or classwork has risen quite substantially over the last years. In countries like Finland, Romania, Croatia, or Israel, you could see the share of teachers using technology having more than doubled over the last 5 years. And this is an area where the Slovak Republic has sort of not made that much progress. You can see the data for 2013 and 2018 are quite similar. In 2013, the Slovak Republic was positioned quite well internationally. But when you look at 2018, many other countries, teachers had become much more comfortable with using technology. So this is an area, I think, to think about harder in the future. How can teachers be better equipped to deal with technology? You can see, but overall, you can even see some of the advanced countries. Now, like the end of the story here is Japan. It's a high-tech country, but still you can see for teachers, technology is still very, very new phenomenon. On the other hand, Denmark, New Zealand, Australia, United Arab Emirates, that's where technology use is really very common. Now, how did countries support their teachers? Many countries have been very quick to deploy online resources for teacher development. Peer networks have also played an important role. Now, where teachers, professional learning communities, also you can see here that teachers were more skeptical in their responses when it comes to collaboration in their school. So governments think this is working well, but teachers are often quite skeptical. I think we need to do more to get teachers on board for this. Countries have also just-in-time guidance from leadership, but also you can see about a quarter of the teachers were not offered professional development during the pandemic, and very little money was available for this. So the investment in teacher capacity in most countries is still a big issue. The demand is much higher than the kind of supply. Now, let's look forward. Many countries are now well on their way to reopening their school systems. And you can see that about half of the respondents said there is also now a date for the reopening of their schools. And in almost all of the countries, that's happening this school year. Countries have taken quite different approaches as to whether students should be legally obliged to attend school. About 60% say yes, that is mandatory. About 40% say they leave it up to parents and children to decide. Obviously, you need to always reconcile health and education in this. And it is true that the medical benefits of school closures are quite small. The risk of the spread of the virus through schools is not as high as someone might think. Household quarantine, case isolation, workplace social distancing, Those things are much more effective than closing schools. But still, the schools do contribute to the spread of the virus. So countries obviously must, make arrangements in place. And you can see, therefore, also most countries will open the schools progressively. There's some variation by grade, by geography. And obviously, social distancing is easier for older students now who can respect the rules and comply with them. But at the same time, the opening of schools is more important for younger children who really need basically the supportive environment, the help from the teachers, the parents need to get to work, things like this. So there are some very difficult tensions and dilemmas that countries need to work on. Many countries have put extensive health measures in place in their reopening plans. You can see, that virtually all countries are training students and staff on hygiene or put mandatory social distancing protocols in place. Over 2/3 of respondents are also considering the use of masks, and some are closing open spaces. And this, again, highlights how important it is to have good frontline capacity. Now that schools have the means, the flexibility, the capacity to actually adapt the work environments to their specific needs. And of course, you need trust in the community in those arrangements. Now, the big question all of this raises is, how can we reconcile the requirement for social distancing with innovative pedagogy? If you can only, sit students apart, in very rigid ways, teacher in the front, not being in contact with the students cannot mingle. How do you do project-based learning? How do you do, social interaction? All the kind of 21st century pedagogies that are so important. I think that's one of the biggest struggles. It's easy to reopen schools in some ways, but it's going to be hard to actually find a way that we can actually enable the kind of pedagogies that are most important for tomorrow. And this is precisely where technology could make the biggest difference. Technology is a way to make learning more interactive, more participatory, to bridge, time and space. And that's, I think, where actually a very, very important requirement for the future of life, to build technologies that can actually help advance 21st century pedagogies, even when the physical environment is limited. And you can see, for example, countries like Singapore are planning to introduce, even when the schools are open, an additional kind of day per week for online learning, so that actually students can, learn at their own pace. They can learn, with their kind of develop the resilience, the strategies. I think that's something very, very important. Some things are already clear from the data. In just 1 in 5 cases, are we going to see a return to business as usual? In most cases, the countries plan to use the spaces, the time, the people, and the technology in quite different ways. The most common approaches are a progressive return to students and classroom-based learning in shifts. But you can see also many countries using hybrid models of learning now, which are using technology to bridge learning in school with out-of-school learning. And I do think, again, that is a big part of the future. It's not school versus remote learning. It's the integration of different forms of learning. There's a, case for learning as a place where you interact, where you work with your teacher, and there's a case for learning on your own. And I think the more we can integrate those worlds, the more effective our school systems will be. And you can see in many countries, that's a big, big part of the future. E-learning readiness is also key to reopening plans. You can see that virtually all countries plan to deliver targeted teacher training and secure internet connectivity. Now, that's still a big issue, including in the Slovak Republic. But there's also investment in other tools than online learning, television, radio. We shouldn't forget them. They can be very, very effective tools and much easier to deploy. And then, of course, effective e-learning platforms and content. They're also very, very important. When it comes to online platforms, you can see very wide differences among countries. On the left side, you can see Singapore, Eastern China, Denmark. But again, on the right side, we also have countries like Japan, Germany, high-tech countries, but still a long way to go on earning platforms. Greece, Portugal, Colombia, Chile, and then the Slovak Republic. So you can see basically only about 40% of principals say today that they have access to an online platform for learning. So there's more work to do in the future to make sure that this is evenly spread. You can also see that student well-being plays an important role in the reopening of schools, and I think that is a big issue. The assessment of students' mental health, basically special support measures for students in distress, dealing with violence at home, counseling of students, and then special measures for students from disadvantaged backgrounds. Now, many countries are planning summer schools, additional learning, additional support at school, and those means are, I think, very, very important. And then, of course, there are contingency measures. Now, what are we going to do if the virus strikes again? What you can see, and that's, I think, very interesting, is that there are very few cases where countries will close the schools, all schools again. Basically, in most cases, there will be much more nuanced responses. Individual classrooms will be closed, students and staff will be tested, or the affected students and teachers will be taken in quarantine. So I think we are going to see a much more nuanced way of dealing with the crisis rather than the kind of across-the-board school closures. So let me conclude with what matters most, and that is really the investment in capacity. And our data from the Thales survey show that there's still a big gap between teacher capacity now and the kind of learning environments that you may want to see. You can see, for example, here, teachers are quite comfortable with, delivering instruction to students. I explain to students what I expect them to learn. I explain how new and old topics are related. I set goals at the beginning of instruction. Those are things that teachers are very comfortable with. Also, classroom management is something they do. But when it comes to cognitive activation, you can see less than 60% of teachers say they give tasks that requires the students think critically. Less than, or 50% say I have students work in small groups to come up with a solution. And those things are very, very important for the future. Less than 50% say I let students to solve complex tasks, or I present tasks for which there is no obvious solution. And then last but not least, giving students projects that require at least 1 week to complete. You can see it's just 30% of the cases. So once again, there is still a big gap between the pedagogy that we need for tomorrow's world and the reality in classrooms. And this is something that countries will need to work on to equip more teachers with better skills. Some countries are working on this. You can see there's a lot of effort to counseling teachers, to train teachers, to also support technology experts, and companies are being supportive of teachers. You can see that's the case now in 40%. And a little bit of actually additional staff. But I think there's a lot more to be done to make sure that our teachers get the support they need to do the amazing work they do every day. Thank you very much for your attention.
Mr. Schleicher, thank you very much that we have you here. I really appreciate that you shared with us data. It's perfect. Really, thanks again. I wish you have a great day.
Thank you very much.